My name is Sophia. At 31. I work part-time at a neighborhood supermarket. Today is the beginning of November. This time of year, things start to get busy as we head towards the year-end. Manager, I'd like to discuss some time off over Christmas. Would that be all right? Well, that's unusual. It's not like you to ask for time off. The truth is, we're thinking of spending Christmas at my husband's parents' house this year. I'm afraid I'll need to take the 24th and 25th off. Oh, that's what it's about. Of course, that's fine. You're always working hard, Sophia. Thank you. That's a great help. Isn't your husband's family based quite far away? And you're from around here, right, Sophia? Yes, I'm from the neighboring town, but my husband is from Boston. Boston, huh? That's quite a distance. Yes, it is. Unfortunately, due to circumstances, we haven't been able to introduce Alexander yet. Oh, that's why. Even more for you to head back. Don't worry about the store. Go and visit. Thank you. I appreciate your understanding. Alexander is my son, now 2 years old, and attending a childcare center. When I gave birth 2 years ago, a certain societal issue made it difficult to introduce him, and we haven't found the right time. Recently, things have finally started to calm down, and it seemed like a good time. My husband, Lucas, is a medical technician at a hospital, and it has been difficult for him to take time off, so we were particularly keen to make it happen this Christmas. Do you think you can get time off for Christmas? I think I'll be okay. Sophia, what about you? Yeah, I got the okay from my manager. Lucas returns home after Alexander is asleep. As we share a late dinner, Lucas asked me the question. Today, we had agreed to discuss whether we could both get time off from work. Oh, by the way, I'll call my dad. He tried to reach me while I was on my way home. Whenever there's news, it's always my dad who calls. My mom is a quiet type. She tends to delegate communication tasks to my dad. That's true, now that you mention it. My father-in-law has a cheerful personality and was quite friendly when we first visited to announce our marriage. He's always laughing and engaging in conversation. On the other hand, Mil, as Lucas put it, is quiet and speaks sparingly. Honestly, since getting married, we've hardly had the chance to converse, and I was hoping this visit to Lucas's home would help close the distance a bit. Hello? Dad? What's up? Ah, got it. I'll talk to Sophia about it later. Lucas hung up the phone and turned to me. Dad. He's really excited to meet Alexander. Can't stop talking about it, haha. What, He said to let him know if there's anything you want or need. I wonder what's going to happen when we get there, haha. But I'm glad they're excited. My parents also said we should go this year. They said we should introduce Alexander. But you love Fael and Mail too, don't you? Haha. We're both in the same boat, aren't we? And so, looking forward to our return to Lucas's home, the day finally arrived. Christmas morning. After about a 4-hour drive, we arrived at Lucas's house just before noon. I knew Asael's family had already arrived because their car was parked there. Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas! We called out as we stepped into the entrance. And there, with a beaming smile, was Fael. Good job on the drive. Take it easy today. And in Fael's arms was Ava, Sael's daughter. Ah, Merry Christmas! Ava, you've grown so much. I'm 6 years old now. Really? You're in elementary school? Yeah. Oh. There's Alexander. Ava stepped down from Fael's embrace and gave a bright smile to Alexander, who I was holding. Alexander returned her smile. How cute! Come on in, come on in. As Raphael suggested, we entered the house. In the living room were Sales Isabella and Isabella's husband. Isabella's husband shifted his gaze to us and offered a smile. In contrast, Isabella looked at us with a straight face. Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas! Isabella's husband greeted us. However, there was no response from Isabella for some reason. I felt a bit awkward, but then Lucas, who came to the living room later, greeted them. Henry, Isabella, Merry Christmas! Oh. We haven't seen each other for a while, have we? How've you been? Isabella, who had been staring at us until a moment ago, now flashed us a smile. Did they just ignore me? But it seemed like neither Isabella's husband nor Lucas noticed. Maybe I'm overthinking this. I thought, and acted like nothing was wrong as I sat down in the living room. Lucas, watch Alexander for a bit. I'm going to help Emil in the kitchen. Huh? I'm good, really. No, it's important to help out when you can. I asked Lucas to keep an eye on Alexander, and then headed to the kitchen where Emil was. Throughout all of this, Isabella didn't even look my way, but I chose not to let it bother me. I found Emil in the kitchen and said, Emil, Merry Christmas. Let me help you. As soon as I said this, Emil glared at me, bumped my shoulder, and said, You're in the way. What? Mael then left for the living room. I could hear her say, Oh, Lucas. Merry Christmas. Have you been well? Oh, Lucas. Merry Christmas. Have you been well? What's going on? First Isael, and now Emil. Did I do something wrong? I couldn't think of anything I might have done. Lucas and I have been married for 4 years, and it's been 2 years since Alexander was born. We haven't really spoken, or even communicated much over the phone during this time. What could it be? I don't understand. Maybe I shouldn't let it bother me. We were planning to head home later that day. So, I decided I would discuss it with Lucas when we had the time and stopped worrying about it for the moment. When I returned to the living room and took Alexander from Lucas, Phil said, Here you go, Alexander. Monetary gifts for you. Alexander seemed really happy with the envelope Phil handed him. Ah. Sophia, did you hear that? Alexander just said thank you to me. What a smart kid. Phil looked really happy. But what caught my attention was the sight of Emil and Sale grinning as soon as Alexander received the envelope. It wasn't just a simple grin, it seemed rather sarcastic. I instinctively felt they were up to something, but I reassured myself. Nothing like this has ever happened before. It must be all in my head. And so, time passed and in the evening, we headed home. The next day, we went to my parents' house. Since we see them often, Alexander was all smiles when he saw his grandparents. Merry Christmas! Your grandpa and grandma have presents for you. Lucas and I were a bit taken aback by how much my parents spoiled Alexander. Just like the day before, my dad handed Alexander monetary gifts. Ah. Oh, Sophia. Did you hear that? Alexander just said thank you to me. You're kidding, that's exactly what Phil said. Everyone laughed, and as I took the monetary gifts from Alexander, I felt something unusual with my hand. Why does it feel so heavy? I had not sensed anything inside the envelope when I received it from my father-in-law, Phil, the day before. Yet, I couldn't help but wonder at that moment. He wouldn't have put $100 in here, would he? Is that even okay? I decided to chalk it up to my parents' indulgent love for Alexander. Our home is about a 30-minute drive from where we were, so we ate lunch and then headed back. After giving Alexander a bath and putting him to bed, I decided to check the monetary gifts. Oh, it is indeed $100. Just like last year, huh? I kind of feel guilty. Well, we'll have to give something back in return, won't we? Just like last year, my parents didn't hold back. Given I'm an only child, and Alexander is their first grandchild, I understand their affection. Nevertheless, I was a little flabbergasted. Yet, I also felt grateful, so I jotted down the amount of money received. But my dad seemed quite eager too, haha. He was totally in sync with my father-in-law. This year will be interesting, haha. Last year, since we couldn't meet, they had sent us a gift card. Yes, and the amount on the card was $100. They were thrilled to have a grandson, weren't they? Remembering my father-in-law holding Alexander and talking happily the day before, I continued the conversation and opened the envelope. That's when the unexpected happened. Wait, what? A leaf! There was a single green leaf inside the envelope. I was at a loss for words. Then, Lucas, startled by my reaction, exclaimed, "What? A leaf? What on earth is this, haha?" He started to laugh uproariously. But what came to mind at that moment was the behavior of my mother-in-law and Isabella. No way, I thought. Anyway, I'll call them, haha. They'll surely be concerned about this too, haha. Lucas seemed to think it was all a prank, and while laughing, he tried to call my father-in-law. But there was no answer. Oh, they might be in the shower. Let me try calling Mom. Lucas then called his mother. It seemed she answered, and he told her about the leaf. From her surprised reaction, it was clear she was explaining something to Lucas. Oh, so that's what it was, All right, I'll let Sophia know. What? You want to talk to Sophia? Me? Hold on a sec. Lucas pulled the phone away from his ear and said, Mom sounds super apologetic. She says she wants to apologize to you, Sophia. Is that okay? Huh? Oh, sure. While his words were surprising, I reluctantly took the phone from Lucas and picked up the call. Hello. And just like that, Mail went completely silent. Then, I heard a faint, familiar laugh in the background that sounded like Isabella. Cuckoo. Hello? Mill? Like I would ever apologize to the likes of you, you poverty-stricken wife. Excuse me? Your children are as poor as a leaf, huh? See ya, pauper wife. With those unbelievable words thrown at me, she hung up. At that moment, I realized all the events of yesterday were an act of spite. What's wrong, Sophia? You seem off. But how could I ever convince Lucas of what just transpired? First, I needed to find out what Mael told Lucas. Hey, what did Mael say to you? Well, it seems like Dad accidentally gave out the gifts that Ava had prepared. Remember how Isabella and her family came over for Christmas first? Dad had prepared some monetary gifts then. Ava said she wanted to help too. Somehow, in the process, she decided to include a leaf from the garden as a bonus. She might have swapped it with the money. I see. What's up? Sophia, you seem off. I was at a loss for words, being suddenly labeled as a poverty-stricken wife. I've never been through something like this before, and I couldn't find the right words to explain what happened. Actually, But just at that moment, a call came in from Fael. Oh, sorry, it's Dad. Maybe he's calling back. Lucas said, putting the phone on the table, switching it to speaker. The phone rustled. Huh? Dad? Did you call by mistake? Huh? Lucas? Oh, it says Lucas on the phone. Huh? Ava, is that you? Yep, you got it. It turns out Ava was the one who called back using Raphael's phone. You're going to get in trouble with Grandpa, Ava. That's fine. I wanted to talk. Grandpa is in the shower. It's all good. Plus, Grandpa always says we should answer the phone when it rings. So I'm talking for him. While it's nice that Ava is happy to talk on the phone, this isn't the right time. Perhaps sensing my mood, Lucas said, Sorry, Ava, we're in the middle of an important conversation. Oh, really? Well, that's a bummer. Bye, Lucas. And bye, poor Auntie. Wait. Ava. Huh? What's up? What did you say at the end? Both Lucas and I didn't miss what Ava had said at the end. It sounded like she said, poor wife. Because Mommy's grandma also calls Auntie poor wife. She just said it earlier too. Right now, Mom and Grandma are chatting over coffee. Ava, could you explain to Lucas what you mean by earlier? Earlier? When Grandma was on the phone. Yes. So here's the thing. Broke wife once mentioned this to me. It's all about the leaf. Mom used to prepare the leaf with a smile, and Ava taught me all about it. She said that for the less fortunate, monetary gifts come down to a single leaf. Eh? What? Lucas looked at me with a baffled expression. All I could do was stay silent. That's when my sister-in-law, who had noticed Ava's phone call, shouted, Ava! However, at that same moment, my father-in-law said, We'll talk about it later. Feeling confused about what was happening, I saw the phone being handed over from Ava to my father-in-law. Sorry about that. I was taking a shower. Then, when I got dressed and came out, I found Ava saying something outrageous. So, you heard it too, Dad. I'm sorry, Lucas. Could you hand the phone to Sophia? No worries, Dad. We're on speaker. Sophia's listening too. All right, Sophia. Was what Ava just said true? And those bizarre words were targeted at you, right? Why, yes, that's right. My father-in-law stammered over his words. Behind him, I could hear my mother-in-law and sister-in-law speaking rapidly and agitatedly, as if trying to make excuses. My father-in-law sighed deeply. I am truly sorry. Please don't blame Ava. She didn't mean any harm. No, it's all right. We don't mind at all. Ava's not at fault here. Thank you. I'll follow up on this matter. Isabella's here too. We'll confirm things with her. With that, he ended the call. Lucas then looked at me, apologizing. I'm really sorry. I have no idea what's going on. He was utterly confused. I told him about all the discomfort I felt during my visits to Lucas' house. We decided to wait for a response from my father-in-law. Surprisingly, we received a reply sooner than we expected. And amazingly, the very next day, Isabella's husband drove Raphael, Emil, and Isabella to our house. Upon entering, they stood before a sullen mother-in-law and sister-in-law, and Raphael, along with Isabella's husband, apologizing profusely. We've done something truly disrespectful. We're sorry. We apologize for the outrageous behavior of my wife. The deep apology was appreciated, but the two of them didn't utter a single word. After being married for 4 years, I couldn't fathom the reason behind their animosity, even though we rarely met. May I ask, why did you suddenly act this way towards me? I thought if I understood the reason, I could address it. There might be some misunderstanding, I thought. But there was no response to my question. The two of them were intent on ignoring me. Phil, enraged by their attitude, shouted, "Answer her." Finally, Isabella grudgingly responded, but her answer was unexpected. "Well, Mom was originally against the marriage." "Wait, that's it? And why did you let him marry a woman like this? A woman who doesn't even wear a single brand name item, who dresses in mass-produced, cheap clothes." Indeed, I'm not interested in branded items. On the other hand, Isabella is the type who likes branded goods, and my mother-in-law also owns and wears a few brand name items. "Are you saying? Don't tell me that's the only reason you insulted her?" "Huh? That's all it is. I just don't want her in our family. I wish they would divorce soon and she would just disappear, you know?" "You! How could you say something so rude? And what about you? Why are you supporting such a woman? You're a top-tier company employee, an elite. You should choose someone suitable for our family, right? Despite Lucas being a well-qualified medical professional, we can't accept such a woman as a family member, can we?" Upon hearing Isabella's true feelings, her husband was speechless. However, it would soon be proven by the next words of my mother-in-law that this attitude was inherited from her. Originally, you see, I had found a suitable partner for Lucas. Despite that, he brought home some unknown woman and declared they were getting married. It was a true shock. "What? You were doing such a thing without telling us? There are limits to what's acceptable to do to Sophia." It's fine, isn't it? She's just a poor girl, isn't she? Her parents didn't seem very impressive either, quite impoverished, don't you think? She wasn't wearing a single branded item. In other words, she's from a struggling household that finds it hard to make ends meet, right? What? What are you saying? Besides, to love a child born of such a woman, impossible. It would taint our precious Ava. We had plans for her to marry a friend's child. Upon hearing his mother's true feelings, Lucas was speechless. I felt the same way, wondering how I could have missed all this. If I consider that my father-in-law called not out of interest but disinterest, everything makes sense as harassment. Well, it's fine if you divorce. Please do it as soon as possible. Let's go, we don't need to get involved in this farce. Just as my father-in-law was about to say something, I was ready to clear up a misunderstanding for the sake of my pride. The ones who dramatically opened the living room door were my parents. "It's been a while." "Phil. Mill. Did Sophia call you?" "Yep, it must be hard to be talked about like that without saying anything, right?" When I heard that my father-in-law was coming over, I had contacted my parents. It seems they had heard some of Emmael's terrible comments from outside the door. Their timing was perfect. My parents approached Emmael with serious faces. "What is it?" Then, my parents took business cards from their breast pockets and said, "Here you go." Amazingly, they dropped their business cards at Emmael's feet, their attitude seeming to say pick it up. I had to try hard to suppress my laughter. The one who rose to their bait was Isabella, picking up the business card and shouting, "Such arrogance from a poor person. You didn't even wear any branded items today and your clothes look mass-produced." As soon as she looked at the card, Mom. Startled, Emmael also looked at the business card Isabella held. "Why, you two are executives of Lala CLO?" "Yes, my husband and I started out together. He's an executive at the headquarters, I'm the head of planning. Our daughter quit when she got married, you know that, right?" Both of my parents are currently working at the headquarters of La Cielo, a famous low-cost apparel brand. I also, after graduating from college. While I had spoken to my father-in-law and mother-in-law about myself at the time of our marriage, my parents had never explained their situation. So, she could go back to work anytime she wanted, right? What? That's amazing! You work at that famous fashion brand's major corporation. So, what do you mean we're poor? That my grandchild is the grandchild of a poor wife? Because you oppose the marriage, it's okay to harass us? That's not. We're really sorry. But that apology was only because my parents held executive jobs. Needless to say, it was beyond the point of being resolved by just an apology. Henry looked disappointed as he said, I thought it was a good thing to leave Ava with my parents. But you... I stuttered. I'll drive you home. But after that, we'll live separately. What? What are you talking about? I'm glad I got to see your true face. Let's discuss our divorce when we get home. Henry then left the house. At that moment, my father-in-law also stood up, bowed deeply to my parents, saying, I'm really sorry for what happened. He then turned to us. I'm really sorry. I'll be in touch. He too bowed to us. Looking sternly at my pale-faced mother-in-law, he said, Be prepared when you get home. Before he too exited our house. My mother-in-law and Isabella hurriedly grabbed their belongings and rushed out of our home. I caught my breath at home after my parents kindly offered to pick up Alexander from the childcare center. Later, I received a call from my father-in-law. He told me that my mother-in-law had been forcibly sent back to her parents' house. It's a de facto separation. Apparently, they made this decision because they were unsure what she might do to Alexander. But, it's a separation with the premise of divorce, and it seems they are waiting for the right timing. As for Isabella, the divorce was finalized immediately after she returned home. Henry obtained custody of Ava. Isabella, of course, has taken refuge in my mother-in-law's house, but she seems to be getting a good scolding from my mother-in-law's mother, who knows the truth, and is currently on a job hunt. We continue to live our busy daily lives. It feels really good to not only see our child grow up as parents, but also to share this joy with his grandparents. After covering my son Paul's wedding costs. Why only $10,000 for your son's big day? If you're the parent, you should pay the full amount. Right after that, my husband Donald, who had never yelled before. Shut up, kid. What? Just $10,000? For my wedding party, that's it? My son, whom I've cherished more than my life, started laughing as if mocking us. If you're the parent, pay the full amount. Poor thing. Is this really my son? After divorcing my ex-husband, who was drunk and harmful, I remarried Donald, and we've been happily living as a family of 3. Gentle and kind Donald warmly and strictly raised Paul, who was not his blood-related son. To anyone looking, they were father and son, very close. Like his father, my son grew into a kind and gentle boy and successfully became independent as an adult. Living together since his marriage, the life of just the two of us after our son left felt somehow fresh. While enjoying a calm life, suddenly, we got the news that our son had married. It was so sudden and, moreover, we were informed after the fact. Though surprised, we accepted it since he was an adult, but his wife seemed to come from a wealthy family. But that's not what concerned me about her. To put it nicely, she's outspoken and unafraid to speak her mind. To put it poorly, she's insensitive and blunt. Perhaps her personality has influenced my son. As far as I knew, my son was not the type to act that way even after receiving money. He was not the kind of child who would disdainfully call his parents poor. Shock and surprise made my mind go blank. Is this person really my son? I'd rather be told he's just a stranger who happens to look like me. It would be easier on my heart. At that moment, a loud bang echoed as the table was struck, and my usually calm husband erupted in anger. "Shut up, kid!" His eyes were filled with a contempt and anger I had never seen before. I'm Mary, got married at the age of 25. Soon after getting married, we were blessed with a child, and I raised our child as a housewife. It was when our son Paul was 1 year old that I divorced my previous husband, Robert. "It's Mary's fault for making me angry. Cut it out already." When drunk, he would curse at me like that, punching and kicking around the house, throwing things. His bad drinking habit seemed to worsen day by day, and it seemed he was becoming more intolerant to alcohol. In addition to yelling loudly, he seemed to throw things to further intimidate me, and there were times when I was hit and injured. Even then, "Can't you even dodge? It's not my fault." Once, he threw a glass at me while I was holding our son. I instinctively shielded my son. The glass hit my temple and broke. That was when I decided to divorce, fearing that Paul might get injured someday. Robert's drinking problem was only getting worse, and I couldn't guarantee that something life-threatening wouldn't happen someday. I was determined to protect my son, but if something were to happen to me while we were still married, this man would become the guardian of my son. I couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't commit a life-threatening assault. I had to avoid such a terrifying scenario at all costs. So, bleeding from my head, I rushed to the hospital open at night, holding my son, and had them make a medical certificate. We discussed the situation further at the hospital and decided to have them contact the authorities on our behalf. This action officially recognized my son and me as victims of abuse and successfully introduced a third party between Robert and me. Robert was very charming in public, always acting like the perfect husband whenever anyone else was around, especially when he wasn't drinking. That's why it was crucial to have an outsider involved. Eventually, the divorce was finalized. Robert said, "I was just sad that Mary stopped prioritizing me after our child was born. But it just showed how self-centered he was, a disappointment to the end." He only made the first payment for the settlement and child support, which was a few $100s, and then stopped. I tried to follow up initially, but after he started avoiding me and reacting angrily, I gave up. I never really had high hopes to begin with. After the divorce, I approached the company I worked for before getting pregnant, explained my situation, and asked if they could rehire me, and they did. So, I managed to secure enough income to keep us from poverty. What's important is spending time with my son and staying healthy enough to continue working. To do that, I knew I needed to eliminate stress from my life. I want to live with Mary and Paul. The person who stood by me through these trying times was Donald, who joined the company after I had left. I couldn't believe a man in his mid-20s, for years younger than me, with no history of divorce or children, would say such a thing to someone like me. "I want to date you, Mary, but I also want to get married soon." "You shouldn't speak so lightly of marriage." At first, I couldn't trust Donald. I thought his youth meant he had an idealized view of marriage and wasn't thinking it through. For someone who had already failed at marriage once, those were not the words I wanted to hear. "When we get married, we can always be together, and we can share the chores and take care of Paul together, right? Plus, to truly become Paul's father, I need to marry first." "Is it to become Paul's father?" "Of course, I love you, Mary, but I also think of marrying both you and Paul." I was at a loss for words. I hadn't thought he felt that way. Was he serious? "I want to share the same responsibility for Paul." I think that's what it means to stand by you, Mary. And I hope to be included as well." Seeing him smile, I felt the ice around my heart begin to melt. Donald always considered me and Paul together. He never just asked me out for a meal after work. Instead, he would offer to help carry groceries and even bring them to our apartment. Lately, when I had to leave work early because I wasn't feeling well, "I'll pick up Paul from preschool on my way back from my rounds, so please call the preschool," he'd say, and he'd even bring back dinner for Paul and me. Paul was very fond of Donald, and seeing them laugh together made me happy too. By marrying, I gain a lot of rights. To be a husband, a father, a family member. So, please marry me, for my sake. I knew he phrased it that way so as not to burden me, but hearing him say it made me very happy. So, when Paul turned 3, Paul and I decided to remarry Donald. Even though there was no blood relation, Donald and Paul had a close father-son bond. We never told Paul they weren't blood related. It wasn't that we tried to hide it, there just never seemed to be a need or an opportunity to mention it. Because to us, they were undoubtedly father and son. Because they were unmistakably father and son. Donald gave Paul both kindness and strictness. Our household gained another earner, which brought us a bit of financial leeway, allowing us to build a respectable house, though not a mansion. Paul grew up healthy without major illnesses, went to college, became a working adult, and now he has moved out and is living on his own. Currently, Donald and I live together in this house, working. This is the first time we've lived just the two of us since we met, and it feels a bit odd, but I think spending time together leisurely isn't too bad. It's been a few years since our son Paul started working. One day, out of the blue, we got a message. "I got married. I'll come over with my wife this weekend." It was quite the surprising news. We hadn't even heard he was dating anyone, and now he's married. He mentioned they are planning a party and will set a date once everything is decided. Well, he's an adult now, so as long as he takes responsibility for his decisions, that's fine, but getting married without any prior notice was indeed a shock. I wondered if there was some urgent reason, like a pregnancy, but that wasn't the case. Our son has always been a bright and kind boy since childhood. Though he had his moments of rebellion, he was always able to reflect on his actions, so he never really behaved too badly. There was never any cooling of relations within the family, and even after he became independent, he frequently came home to share meals just like before. So, Donald and I were both puzzled by this sudden announcement of marriage. "Welcome back, Paul. I'm home. This is my wife, Jessica." On the weekend, Paul came home with his wife. The woman named Jessica, standing next to Paul, smiled and nodded slightly. She was slim, with a gentle demeanor, very beautiful. "Please come in." I called out to Paul and Jessica, and they entered the room, following Donald down the hallway. I ended up bringing up the rear, but noticed Jessica scanning the house as she moved. Though she followed behind Paul, her gaze flitted restlessly to the stairs and closed doors, and this behavior didn't change even after entering the living room. It was strangely unsettling to watch someone scrutinize another's home so openly, and my curiosity was as piqued as my discomfort. What kind of person was this woman? We sat down at the dining room table to talk. Paul mentioned that Jessica was 2 years his junior and a newcomer who had joined the company this spring. Being 25, she might have transferred from another company. Jessica's parents are well-known corporate chairpersons, and she grew up in a home always attended by housemaids, who took care of everything for her. In other words, she came from wealth. This information all came from Paul, while Jessica sat quietly beside him, not uttering a single word. "Would you prefer coffee or tea? What kind of work do you do at the company?" I hear you're thinking of having a party. Any preferences for the venue or theme? Even when asked such questions, Jessica would just cover her mouth and whisper to Paul. He would answer on her behalf, and Jessica would smile with narrowed eyes. It was incredibly frustrating. Jessica, I know we've just met and you might be hesitant, but feel free to speak up, okay? Donald must have felt the same way. Unable to hold back, he said this, but Jessica remained silent, just smiling with her mouth covered. The pattern of Paul speaking for her continued. We're just here to report today. And they left rather quickly, without us ever hearing Jessica's voice. It's just, well. After the two left, Donald and I could only look at each other and mutter. Are young people these days really like that? No, even the new employees at the company aren't like that. They don't even introduce themselves. They don't make proper eye contact. Not a word of greeting or thanks. Yet, they unabashedly stare around the house, and when we give them a parting gift, they don't say thank you, nor do they feel ashamed for coming empty-handed. It's really strange. Feels like meeting aliens. In any case, the sense of discomfort is very strong. If they're married, all the more reason. It's another household, after all. If Paul and his partner manage on their own, that's all that matters. I think so too. Maybe just keeping in touch to a reasonable extent is best? Donald seemed to feel the same way. He says with a wry smile. Neither of us wants to live together, nor do we have a strict view about our son's wife. So, we both thought that meeting up occasionally would be just right for both parties. That's what I thought, but for some reason, Paul started coming home frequently with Jessica. Maybe because they don't live far away, so it's an easy trip. However, Jessica still doesn't speak a word. Even if I ask something, she whispers to Paul, and Paul answers. Naturally, the conversation doesn't get lively, but the frequency of them having dinner at our place or staying over has increased, and honestly, it's nothing but stress. Today, while I was preparing dinner, I got a message from Paul saying, "We're coming over." Given the timing, I had no choice but to ask if they were planning to have dinner, and of course, the answer came back as if it was expected. Paul and Jessica stay holed up in Paul's room upstairs, not helping with the preparations. Ever since he was young, Paul was always eager to help me with meal prep. Now that he doesn't, it feels bittersweet. I'll go call Paul and the others. After getting help from Donald to get dinner ready, I decided to go upstairs to call the two of them. I really wonder about this. As I went up the stairs, I could hear a voice. Not Paul's voice. A woman's voice I hadn't heard before, so it must be Jessica. This was the first time I heard her speak. Isn't this too old-fashioned? Is this house secondhand? No, it's not. Your father and mother are so plain, and both the house and the people seem poor. It's depressing. My first thought was, so this is her true nature. Though I was infuriated by her rude remarks and scornful complaints, it felt like the unease I had been feeling deep down was finally clear. If you don't cut ties with such an old-fashioned family home, it's divorce for us. Yeah, I'll think about it. Afterwards, I casually found the right moment to call out from outside the room, and the four of us spent a dinner time that wasn't as lively as usual, with Paul and Jessica just eating before leaving. Sigh. I'm disappointed in Jessica's personality and Paul's lack of judgment, but what irritates me the most is Paul saying he'll think about it after being told it's divorce unless he cuts ties. Over post-dinner coffee, just Donald and I shared exactly what I had overheard before dinner. I'm mad at Jessica for casually throwing around the word divorce, and at Paul for considering cutting off his parents and his childhood home. Easy now. Let's calm down a bit. As my anger slowly grew with time, Donald tried to soothe me by stroking my back. Putting his wife first isn't a bad thing for a husband to do. I guess so. They're young, so maybe they can only see things from their perspective right now. Let's wait and see a bit longer. True, considering they're newlyweds. Jessica is young and was raised in a wealthy family. I'm disappointed Paul chose someone like her, but it's fine. Paul's life is his own. After all, even if we're family, we're different people. It wouldn't be strange for our paths to diverge. That's an extreme view, but if it comes to that, we can't do much. Paul is kind at heart, and maybe he'll manage to bridge the gap between Jessica and us. Donald's faith in Paul was evident. Raised by the ever-calm Donald, who never resorted to unjust anger or raised his voice, Paul had grown into a considerate and gentle young man. I trusted him too, but couldn't shake off a feeling of unease about what lay ahead. We've decided on the details for the party. Want to talk about it tomorrow? So, as usual, Donald and I welcomed Paul and Jessica into our home. We sat at the dining table, and as usual, only Paul spoke. Paul, this. I placed an envelope filled with cash on the table in front of Paul. Use this for the wedding party expenses. This money had been saved since my divorce. With a determination to protect Paul no matter what came our way, even if it meant saving little by little for him. Donald knew about this savings account, and since our remarriage, had suggested we contribute a fixed amount monthly. We had already taken out insurance for Paul at the time of our remarriage and were making monthly payments. This savings was partly for my own satisfaction, funded from money I could spare, so there were times I couldn't contribute. Still, we had reached our goal of $10,000. That's why I thought it was the right time to give it to Paul. Paul took the envelope, opened it, and looked inside. For my son's big day, just $10,000? Those were Paul's words. Jessica leaned over to peek inside. If you're the parent, you should pay the full amount, poor thing. Paul sneered mockingly, his mouth twisting unpleasantly, with Jessica making a similar face beside him. My mind went blank. Is this really my son before me? I didn't expect tears of joy, but I hoped it would be helpful for Paul. Shut up, kid. A loud bang on the table and a shout. It was Donald. Both Paul and Jessica were startled, frozen in shock, but so was I. Donald had never raised his voice like this before. Now's a good time to say this. Paul and I have no blood relation. Huh? Paul's surprised voice echoed. It made sense he'd react that way. We had never mentioned it before, and I hadn't expected Donald to reveal it at such a moment. Paul has been with us since he was 2 years old, and when he turned 3, Mary and I remarried, making Paul officially part of the family. Paul was at a loss for words. Mary divorced her ex-husband to protect Paul. I had told Donald everything. The records of dealings with the authorities during the divorce. The medical reports and photos of injuries. Photos of the destroyed home were all shown. Even when Mary was injured by her husband's violence, she protected Paul at all costs. She divorced to avoid any harm coming to Paul. That was when Paul was 1 year old. The ex-husband ran off without paying any compensation or child support. Naturally, there was never any contact from him wanting to see Paul. That was what Mary couldn't forgive the most. She worked hard and saved this money for Paul. Even after marrying me, she continued saving in that bank account from the money she was free to use. Despite there being hardly any leeway, I thought of this bank account as a self-satisfaction, fulfilling my selfish parental pride by doing something for Paul. After marrying Donald, we were financially more comfortable. We didn't have to worry about daily expenses. We could buy necessary school supplies when needed. We were able to get insurance. We could pay the tuition fees without delay. All thanks to Donald. But since Paul is my child, I wanted to do something for him. I may not be blood related to Paul, but I love him as my son. I truly believe that. I think Donald and Paul are like real father and son. But in a different dimension, Mary loves Paul. It's incomparable to me. I think it's meaningless even to compare. It's embarrassing to have it put into words again, but I think it's true. Paul is more precious to me than my own life. I've felt that way since he was conceived. Then what did you say just now? Say it again. I'm sorry. When Donald raised his voice to question, Paul apologized just as loudly. Really, I'm sorry. That's right, I vaguely remember. The old apartment we used to live in when I was little, and moving out from there. Do you remember? You only lived there until you were 3. It was when Donald and I moved to a spacious condominium when we got married. Sorry, thank you. Mom and Dad, thank you. Paul, looking us straight in the eye, had the same kind face of the gentle son he's always been. Really, I'm sorry. I'll think it over again. We'll plan a ceremony that we can actually afford, just the 2 of us. What? Wait a minute. The one who cut in was Jessica. It was the first time she spoke up in front of us. I'm not changing the plan, okay? I actually want to add more options. There are so many more things I want to do. Jessica, shouting at Paul, was nothing like the demure image she had presented. Selfish, hysterical, and self-centered. We live this modestly, so you must have saved more money, right? It's your son's wedding, so pay up. Jessica then directed her hostility towards me as well. I wasn't surprised by Jessica's words, but what an outrageous woman she was. I sighed before deciding to speak up. Paul just said it, didn't he? We should consider within the budget of both your savings and what I can contribute. Are you kidding? If it's going to be such a poor-looking party, better not have it at all. Then maybe it's best not to have it? No, if there's no party, then there's no point in getting married. It was utterly illogical. Where should I even start to make them listen? How much is the party costing now? $80,000. $80,000? How much can you 2 contribute? Suddenly, Jessica fell silent. She shifted her gaze to Paul. I can only manage $10,000. Jessica says it's impossible for her. If Jessica's family is wealthy, couldn't you ask them for support? Jessica's parents said they wouldn't give any money. Jessica was told you'd understand why. Wasn't hers supposedly a rich family? Yet, why wouldn't they pay for their daughter's party? Donald and I exchanged puzzled looks. When we all stared at Jessica, waiting for her to explain, she made a face as if she'd tasted something bitter. Jessica. It's impossible. But why? I overspent a bit. On what? Dad's credit card. Jessica gradually answered Paul's questions. It turned out Jessica was given a credit card by her father as pocket money, which she used for shopping. However, her spending spiraled out of control, maxing out the credit card limit, and her parents were furious. Realizing they had spoiled her too much, they decided not to give her any more money, no matter the situation, to make her experience earning her own money. She was placed in the same company as Paul through a family connection. Yet, it seems Jessica hadn't saved anything at all. Living at home, she shouldn't have had living expenses, but the habit of spending money as if it were infinite was hard to break. That's why Jessica's parents decided not to contribute financially to the party. They probably believe it won't be until Jessica adopts a normal sense of money that this stance will change, but for now, it's deemed impossible. Then $80,000 is impossible. That's why you should ask your real family to pay. Paul whispered his feelings meekly, but Jessica pressed him loudly.
Didn't I say? If we don't share the same view on money, we can't get married. There's no point in marrying someone who doesn't have money. I have no use for poor people.
Jessica is the poorest here.
What did you say?
Jessica was infuriated by Paul's blunt words. Probably the last thing she wanted to hear. After calling my family poor, to think you're the poorest is just ridiculous. Anyway, let's apologize properly. Of course, I need to apologize too.
If you don't have money, there's no use for you. We're getting a divorce anyway.
Jessica's attitude seemed nothing more than a string of whims, and Paul's response became sluggish. It must be exhausting when the conversation goes nowhere. Why did Jessica marry Paul? So, I decided to ask what I wanted to know. She seemed capable of answering. I wanted to marry someone from the same company. Why someone from the same company? If you marry someone from the same company, you can quit your job, right? I see. That used to be quite common. When colleagues from the same workplace got married, it was often the woman who quit. Maybe that culture still exists at Paul and Jessica's company. I don't want to work anymore. If I get married, I can quit, right? I can't quit right now because of the wedding guests, but I'm quitting as soon as the party's over. It felt wrong on many levels, but at least it was clear that Jessica's parents' intentions weren't getting through at all. What a pity. Why did you always whisper to Paul and let him do the talking? I was simply curious. I couldn't understand why she would do such a thing.
It's because I didn't want to talk to someone who reeks of poverty. I didn't want to be tainted by it. Plus, they'd listen if it's their son talking, right?
I was amazed that there were actually people who would say something like this, a clear mistake. At this point, there's really no saving her.
Jessica, can you explain this?
I took an envelope from the cabinet behind me and spread its contents on the table for Jessica to see. It was several photos. In all of them, Jessica was pictured, but she was arm in arm or embracing men who were not Paul. And each photo featured a different man.
Jessica, what is this about? It's what I want to know. What is this?
Jessica panicked at Paul's question. But I wasn't about to let it slide.
These are evidence of your affairs, aren't they? What? Are you serious? Did you hire a detective?
Correct. When I heard Jessica threatening divorce if my son's ties with our family weren't cut, I wondered why she would so easily resort to divorce. The discrepancy between her public facade and her true nature seemed too large, raising my suspicion. So, I had a detective investigate, including any affairs. The results were striking. Or perhaps more aptly, they were a complete miss. It appeared she had been dating several men, hiding the fact that she was married.
Are you dating these men to get them to buy you things? Of course. If I can't buy them myself, someone else has to.
Is there a need to go to hotels?
Shut up. Shut up. It's none of your business.
Jessica seemed resigned, not bothering to hide her actions anymore. This concerns me, though. Paul spoke in a low voice. Jessica flinched but soon glared at Paul with sharp eyes.
We're getting a divorce.
Of course. And I'll be seeking compensation.
Why?
You should know why. Paul glared back at Jessica. Her assertive stance seemed to leave her speechless, and she stood up abruptly.
I'm leaving. I've had enough.
With those words, she stomped off and left. The sound of the door closing echoed, and we all sighed deeply together. Paul and Jessica's divorce was finalized without issue. Though we sought compensation, the likelihood of receiving full payment was slim. Worse, Jessica had accumulated debt from purchasing expensive bags and shoes that she had insisted Paul buy for her, with Paul co-signing the loans. Given Jessica's likely bankruptcy, all debt repayment responsibilities would fall on Paul, potentially demanded in full due to his guarantor status. After consulting with a lawyer, it seemed manageable through debt restructuring, so that was the planned course of action. Although they divorced, the obligation to repay the debts didn't disappear, and having to pay a large amount of debt for a woman he no longer loved is a sad tale. However, it can only be considered an expensive lesson learned. All I did was have a lawyer send letters to Jessica's affair partners. The letters insinuated that they might be liable for the debts Jessica incurred during the marriage, questioning if they were okay with that given their involvement in her adultery. This led to all of Jessica's affair partners, now aware of her misdeeds, coming to the company demanding repayment for the money they had spent on her. Then, all meeting face to face, they started another commotion, which eventually made the company aware of the situation. Jessica, who was disowned by her own family, seems to be living alone in a cheap and old apartment.
Home sweet home.
Welcome back. Dinner's ready soon.
Yay! I'm going to wash my hands.
After the divorce, Paul started visiting home occasionally, just like before, spending time with the family. Actually, I was pretty angry about the whole situation and was thinking of banning Paul from coming over for a while, but after he came to our house alone later. I'm truly sorry. He apologized sincerely. I thought to myself that an apology doesn't fix everything, still feeling angry.
It's okay. Mary and I both love you, Paul,
Donald said with a gentle smile, so I couldn't stay mad any longer, and things went back to normal. Have you finished paying off your debts? Yeah, managed with my savings. But now I've used them all up. That was brave of you. The thought of the interest rates sent shivers down my spine. Well, I guess I deserved it. While having dinner, we talked about such things, and Paul chuckled. Despite the tough times, seeing him accept and overcome his mistakes, able to talk about it like this, made me think my son has grown as a person.
Mom, can I have some more?
Of course. Living with just Donald and occasionally having Paul come back home, I felt happy that the three of us could spend time together just like before.